Hey everybody, how's it going? Steve Bauman here, just checking in to do a live stream. This one over here is going to be an Alla Prima painting, and I'm just starting out, by the way, with a little bit of a time lapse, as I usually do a quick sketch just before I go into kind of Alla Prima painting. This is maybe about a 30-minute sketch that, I mean, is cool or whatever, and when I do finally make an Alla Prima tutorial on Patreon, like definitely the drawing aspect of it is going to be covered, but for these live streams I kind of just wanted to make it more about the paint. And so yeah, we're just going to kind of speed through that anyway. I'm just trying to set up the proportions and kind of get to a place where my color won't be so muddy when I block in. But right off the top, I wanted to mention this is the last month that you will have access to the Patrick Burns portrait drawing tutorial on my Patreon page. After this month, it is going to be extracted and sent over to Atelier Forum, which is a website that is under construction at the moment. But there it will be available for one-time purchase. But like I said, for right now, you can get to that for just your $10 subscription to Patreon. You can access it in all the ways that you want to after this month. That's going to be over. Also, coming up next month is going to be, we're going to be back into the Atelier tier. So we're going to be doing our next assignment, which is advanced cast drawing. And that is going to be on toned paper. The tutorial is going to involve like the stretching and toning of the paper itself as well. And then we're going to be drawing with graphite and white chalk on that toned paper, making a fully kind of realized strong light effects on the cast itself. But that's coming up next month, just FYI. There's a few questions coming in already, and so I'm just going to start kind of chatting about those, and yeah, we can kind of see what comes up over the course of the conversation. MJ Artwork is asking, why do you use the wireframe centerline approach to block in your portraits rather than masses of value? The answer to this really actually kind of goes all the way back to my student days. So when I first kind of learned how to draw, and just to be clear, you know, I was drawing before I went to the academy, just not well, you know, I mean, I could kind of draw stuff sometimes and it would come out okay sometimes. And I didn't really have like a method or methodology or vocabulary or anything like that. I'd gone through my drawing class at college, so I'd drawn like a still life and some gesture drawings and stuff, but wasn't like fully formed by any stretch of the imagination in any event, whatever. What I'm saying is, when I came into the academy, I was introduced to this idea of kind of drawing in masses of value, or if not drawing in masses of value, then at the very least thinking in masses of value. Now, we were doing all of our work from life, so whatever, for you know, 5 days a week, you know, 6 to 8 hours a day, I was drawing from life, and some of that time was drawing in charcoal and things. And so yeah, we would block in like big heavy shadows and try to model the lights and things. And my overwhelming feeling during those years was one of kind of not being in control, namely because like the model would move, and the way I was working in sight size, I was always relying kind of on the model to kind of be consistent. And if you've ever worked from life, then you understand like models are the opposite of consistent. Literally every time they stand up, they're in a different position slightly. It's just the way things work. You can't avoid it. You just have to find a way to work around it. What I realized over time is that I needed to develop a realistic vision on my paper more so than make a copy of what was up in front of me. So I couldn't just rely on measuring every time to find out where the model was and what the distances were. That's not how I could achieve, you know, correctness or accuracy or whatever. So I started kind of looking internally, looking into the figure for constructive elements and aspects that could allow me to be sure that my drawing was correct, even if the model was kind of well out of position. Now, this doesn't mean that using centerline construction is in a way contrary or opposite from using masses of value. All constructive, you know, theory is it's conceptual and can be overlaid on any type of drawing, painting, etc. So it's not that I use one rather than the other. It's just that I happen to, in my work, not do as much just mass drawing as I do centerline construction in the beginning, just because I find one much more efficient than the other. Then I'm really in control of what I'm going to do with my values throughout. And also, by the way, we're talking all about this compressed period of time that is maybe the first half hour, the first hour of the drawing process. You know, it's really where these things kind of are fleshed out. By the time I get past that first hour, probably I am working in masses, in addition to whatever linear structure I was using as well. So let's see. Oh, wow. A lot of questions just popped in, so I'm going to get to them just in the order that they came. Ellipse, ELLIPZ, asks, what would be the best way to learn how to draw humans and portraits from life? The stipulation from life is useful here because, again, you have to, just like I was speaking about a moment ago, you kind of have to contend with this idea that what you're working with will move. So I think anything that is going to too strictly rely upon, you know, stillness probably works a little bit against you. But let's say this, right? And I'm not the first one to say it. I won't be the last one. I was just reading through a lot of Solomon J. Solomon and Sargent notes and so on. And, you know, you read this over and over and over. It always comes up that these artists will say, and I'll say also, there's a lot of roads to get to Rome. You don't have to take just the one, right? So you can practice site size, you can practice constructive, you can practice comparative, you can practice all these different ways, and they're all going to lead you towards naturalism and representation. The question that I would have for you about your question is, are you referring to learning more deeply or learning faster? Because actually that kind of changes the answer significantly. So I put a high premium on deeper learning because I feel like, you know, for myself and my own experience, I understood eventually that my first run through a drawing education was a shallow one. And that really I needed to get deeper if I was going to have my own sense of like autonomy and ability to be versatile and draw what I wanted to draw, how I wanted to draw it, how I wanted to kind of express myself. I wasn't there yet after that first pass. So if you want to learn faster, right, I think then that you focus on a very visual approach. So for instance, something like what I went through where we worked a lot with shadow shape and light shape, with sort of large unified envelope shapes or enveloped shapes that can help you to kind of build up a very quick visual impression that is passable and can be really good. Actually, if you're really good, that can do wonders for you. For me, after that, I went into learning about like kind of constructive drawing, learning about the major forms of the body, you know, elements that early on can be exploited to create a stronger sense of design and reality before you actually get into values, so that you have a little bit more freedom when you get into those values with what you want to do. So I would say that if you want to learn deeper, I would say go constructive, go linear, you know, search for design elements and what makes up the body. If you want to go faster, go visual, go big impression. Eventually, in the long run, realistically, I'd recommend that you integrate both of those kind of conceptions of drawing and design into your practice. Because frankly, like, I don't know what kind of artist you want to be, you know, like what kind of work really jives with your aesthetic. So not knowing that, I can just give a kind of a generic advice about it. Right, let's see. Oh, and that you were saying from life, essentially, it's not so relevant. You know, I guess when I think of learning to draw, there's a lot of principles that you can learn either way. But if you're drawing from life, maybe I would recommend understanding a little bit more the big forms, constructive forms of the body. as well, just because you're going to need to create that reality in your work that is almost in a way like independent of the model. It has to function, because some models, like I remember at the academy, some models were just terrible. There was actually, all right, I'll tell you, this is an all-timer story here, and I wasn't actually in the model room for this one, so this is secondhand, but it's from a very it's a source that I am certain of. So there was this new model that came in. She was going to be modeling for a long pose, which is about 75 hours of modeling over the course of 5 weeks. You got 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. This model's up on the stand. And what we do is we put the model in a contrapposto, usually, right? Which means that your hips are tilted like this and your shoulders are tilted counter to that, meaning that you have a compression on this side of the body and a stretching on that side of the body. This is a classical pose. You can trace it back to Greece. You can trace it back even further into India. You can see sculptures that are made essentially in a contrapposto as well. But this is the standard pose that we would choose in one way or another, because the gravity kind of locks the model into place. If you have your weight evenly distributed between two legs, you can kind of shift back and forth in between them, or you're less likely to re-find your center. If you have your weight on one foot, right, in a contrapposto, like you can't really lean out of it. Your gravity is kind of set on that singular center of gravity at the bottom, right? So she's up there in this pose, they're very uncomfortable poses, and she's like moving around a lot, and she's, you know, not particularly good at posing, which is fine. I mean, it's uncomfortable, like it hurts to pose. So some people are able to deal with it better than others. Some models are great, like a stone, you couldn't move them, you know, but she was not. So the weeks are going on, and people in the model room are like kind of grumbling, you know, this model is not so great or whatever. Until there's one day, right? You know, the models, when they get up on the stand, they put down their robe. So they usually have like their cell phone or whatever is like in their pocket of their robe, and they put that down, they get nude, they get up on the stand, and they're posing. Well, anyway, her phone rings, which, first of all, like in the model room, your phone is not meant to ring. Everybody's phone is off, or it's not even in the model room, you know, because everybody's trying to focus. And so her phone rings, and she gets down and actually reaches for the phone and gets the phone, which, first of all, is crazy. Like, I guess probably she'd be expected to maybe get off the stand and turn off the phone, but she picks it up and she's like, hey. And then she gets back up on the stand, gets back into the pose with 90% of her body, and with her other hand actually just like has the phone up, and it's like, yeah, I can't talk. At which point, anyway, everybody in the studio is like just smoke coming out of their ears, really upset. In the long run, whatever, she was just a model and she posed for 5 weeks and she went. But this story endured as probably the most unappreciated model behavior that I can recall during my student days. Anyway, I forget how we got here, but I guess it was talking about studying from life and models. Yeah, models move around, so you need to be certain of your construction. Let's see. Gabrielle Machado is saying, hey, Stephen, love the channel. Thanks for everything. Don't know if this question is too off topic, but was Bridgman a step to shaping your approach to anatomy, or did you focus on other refs? Yeah, Bridgman, you know, like, all right, so starting out drawing, like everybody's seen a Bridgman book. Like, I think before I even knew that academies were a thing that people did, you know, I think before I'd even gone to art school, like I'd seen one of those books, right? Like the Bridgman book. There's one on, you know, the human form, and there's another one that's on drawing hands and whatever. These guys, there's a few books that were made that everybody like kind of has a version of. I think from Dover, if I remember correctly. But I'd seen it, but I also had never drawn the human figure. So it was like really incomprehensible. You know, it's like hieroglyphics. You know, I just don't have any frame of reference for it. I don't have any context. So I've never drawn the serratus anterior. You know, like I've never thought about the rib cage. Like none of this stuff makes any sense to me whatsoever. And that's where I kind of left it for a very long time. In fact, it wasn't really probably till after, I had studied at the academy that I even looked into Bridgman again. And I was studying anatomy, and it starts to kind of make sense when you know how to make sense out of it. But for the uninitiated, it can be really, really, really difficult. Because of that, it certainly wasn't formative for me, in my early approach to drawing. Later on, once I had studied, I think I kind of, peripherally, I browsed some of the books. I never invested too heavily in them. I mean, they're great, by the way. This is not me saying anything qualitative about them, except, they're great. And just by coincidence, I kind of skipped over them, when I was kind of learning about the figure. Also, the school that I went to was really, really visual based rather than construction based. And Bridgman, I mean, if he's about anything, he's about construction, right? So, no, he didn't necessarily do that. By the time I got into kind of studying anatomy and studying the human body and so on, there were a couple books that kind of, dominated that conversation where I went to school, and that was Richet's Artistic Anatomy. And then also Goldfinger's, I think it's Human Anatomy for the Artist, perhaps. In any event, eventually it was starting to study Ecorche. Well, let me actually go before that. There's a great app made by Scott Eaton, who's an artist from the UK, and it's basically a digitized version of a classic or 19th century French artist Houdon's famous Ecorche. Now, these Ecorche models, this one in particular was life size, and it was used kind of as an anatomical, like it's used as what the app is used for, which is a 3D model of the human anatomy that students can study in relationship to a model. So I started really getting into that and using that a lot when I was drawing the human body, because it's my feeling, of course, that actually understanding the muscular forms in context is really what you have to do as an artist. Understanding them, from Da Vinci's diagram, it's fine and it's better than nothing. But when you go up to the model, there's not many poses that are in like the standard anatomical position, right? The muscles and body is like moving and changing, and you have to actively search out the muscle forms to be able to identify them. So Scott Eaton's app was really, really useful for that. Also because he took Houdon's original design and actually made it a little bit more naturalistic. So huge shout out to Scott Eaton. It was really formative, actually, in my early experiences kind of studying anatomy. Then eventually I went to Florence again. And there was actually a former student of mine who was then the director of the Ecorche program in Florence, Janne Jaskalainen, who is an amazing artist in his own right. But I did like probably a 2.5 week intensive and built a 1/3 life size Ecorche, body from scratch. So starting from the rib cage and pelvis, basic forms, centerline construction, and moving outward to the subcutaneous muscle forms. That was like, stars in my eyes, light bulbs going off everywhere. Once you start sculpting the human form, everything kind of changes a little bit about how you kind of think about drawing it. If you ever have the opportunity to kind of work in 3 dimensions, I would highly recommend it. Which, by the way, there's a sculptor called Audal de Juana who, just before the pandemic, I flew over to Jersey City when my wife and I were still living there. We filmed a portrait demo in my studio for about 3 days, and I've just now kind of gotten that footage sorted, and it's going to be released sometime. I don't have a date yet, but that is coming up on the horizon, which I'm super excited about. Because in a way, for me, like sculpture is everything. Like sculpture is so huge. In a way, it's also really shaped a lot of actually my work in a strange way. But anyway, yeah, that's my riff on Bridgman. He's fantastic, but I didn't get on the Bridgman train necessarily. I'm happy for other people that do though. Let's see. JD Anarchy is asking, so when are we gonna paint a skull? I could get into skull painting. Why don't I get into skull? If I was going to paint a skull, I feel like I would want to use like some different kind of lighting situations. I'd like to do like some primary plus like a rim light or something. Maybe I'll set something up that's going to give me some really dynamic kind of exciting lighting on a skull. And at that point, it will be interesting probably to paint a skull. But let's see. Madeline Pater says hi from Sweden. Hello, Madeline. Juan Hernandez says, "Will you continue the series of features of the face, the nose, the mouth, etc.?" Yeah, that part of my Patreon production got kind of jammed up a little bit. It got lost a little bit in the pandemic and my international move, from Jersey City to Norway. So for sure, like it's on the agenda, but it's like the agenda has just got so many things on it that going back to the features has proven tough because it's a little bit outside of my workflow right now. For sure, like it's something I want to do, but I am a one human being program, so I can only be in so many places at once. But I totally hear you. I'd love to kind of continue that, and I want to continue that. How soon that's going to happen is a big, giant question mark. Let's see. All right, Judith from Newport News, Virginia says hello and thank you. You're welcome. Jeff says hello and is saying that the sound is good, which this is the first time I haven't checked the sound. Thank you for letting me know. Here's a name that I'm going to struggle with, but I'm going to get through it and see if I can pronounce it right. Christian Georgiev. You got to forgive me if I got that wrong. Says, how do you get a balance between cool and warm colors? How can you determine which color is cool and which color is warm, especially in the shadow areas where it is mostly muddy? Hey, Kirsten, this is a technical challenge that is completely analogous to understanding value. It's about context, and I would say that I would only maybe clarify in your question that shadow areas are mostly muddy. I think that what you're trying to say there is that the values are really rather close together, so maybe it's a little bit more difficult to tell, but like muddy infers something like a little bit different. Muddy infers like something that is like being pushed together in the wrong way and creating the wrong kind of like color or the wrong kind of value. Usually it's because when something gets muddy, right? Let's talk about like a gradient of color. When you're going from, say, blue to orange, right? Like you're painting like a sky gradient. If you're going from blue to orange, you just mix blue and orange. What's going to happen when those two colors meet is you're going to get a gray in the middle. Now, in the sky, actually, the way that will work is that you will go from blue to green, essentially, and through that you'll go into yellow-orange. This is like how color progresses. So you need that color in between to actually create an appropriate and colorful transition. A lot of times when people are making muddy colors, what they're doing is they're just taking one complement, pushing it up against another, and kind of rubbing in between, and they get this really gray kind of muddy value in between, color in between. With values, it's not dissimilar in that you put two values together that don't necessarily meet close enough, and then you have to scrub and scrub and scrub until you kind of get them to transition. What you want to be doing rather is actually finding that intermediate value and painting that in itself. So how do you balance cool and warm? How do you find cool and warm? I mean, the answer to one is the answer to the other. You find cool and warm by establishing the ends of your spectrum. What's the coolest thing in the picture? What's the warmest thing in the picture? When you're thinking cool, think blue. When you're thinking warm, think orange. Some people on social have like disputed me about this. I've yet to see any documentation that would say anything other than red orange being warm and blue violet being cool. If you have an article out there, please send it to me. I'm always happy to learn something new. But what I wanted to say was, right, we don't often have like a primary blue and like a primary orange or not primary, but like a pure orange inside of a picture. Like in Malcolm's portrait right now, like above me, there's no hot orange and an ice cold blue. So what you do is you find like what the most chromatic warm and the most chromatic cool are. Then you can look at any other part of the face or the painting, and you can just compare it to the warmest, compare it to the coolest, and try to get a sense of where it is on the spectrum of temperature. Now, you can expand this idea out and get more and more complex. The more complex the palette and the subject that you have is, if you have strong chromatic greens, yellows, reds, blues, you're doing an outdoor painting, this becomes a more involved equation. In flesh tones, we're usually just thinking, is it warmish? Is it coolish? But that's how you see them. Controlling them is just controlling your palette. So if you have enough experience with your palette, your colors, you should be able to, through identifying them correctly, be able to control them. I think that a lot of the problem that people have really is identifying them. The actual mechanics of oil paint are not profoundly complicated. It's not easy. I'm not saying that, but it's also not rocket science. But if you're missing the mechanics, if you're missing the tool to actually identify, you won't be able to do it with much consistency or high probability of success. Let's see. Ma'am P says, could you recommend a couple of easel brands for small home studio use? Yeah, well, it depends upon what you're going to do. I mean, you can't go wrong with Maybeth, right? Now, I know like easels seem like they're like this complicated thing. Easels seem like they're kind of they're tough to use or whatever. Or sorry, not tough to use. What I wanted to say was, oftentimes you hear people saying, "Oh, it's really expensive" or whatever. You can get like a solid H-frame easel for around $100, $120 US. I know that that's all relative, and believe me, it's been times in my life when 100 or 125 bucks was a lot. But you want a solid easel to work on, spend the money, get the easel. If you want like a tabletop easel, that's when I think you have some different options, because I would say don't buy a tabletop easel, make a tabletop easel. What you basically need is like a I'm just going to draw like a little diagram here on my I've got this little paper in front of me, right? And I'll show you like the tabletop easel that I have made for myself, essentially. It's going to take me 1 second to draw this. It's going to be a horrible drawing. But you will get the point once I'm done with it. Right. So this is going to be fantastic. This is the tabletop easel that I built for myself. It's 2 wedges of wood with a little L bracket on the left and right hand sides. That L bracket has a screw going into the triangular wedge and a screw going into the table. Then there's a flat piece of wood that both of those are kind of screwed into. Both those wedges of wood are screwed into. This gives me like an inclination that if this is perfectly vertical, is tilted a little bit back like this. I do that primarily because when I'm working like at my desk, I'm usually live streaming, I'm filming to live stream, or in some way I'm doing something that's like video oriented. So I've got lights that are kind of coming from above. So I need to tilt back just a little bit to make sure I get enough of that light that the canvas has enough light on it. So that's my tabletop easel solution. Literally would cost you like £10 probably if you were going to the hardware store just to get the stuff to make it. And really minimal work. Maybe you need a drill gun, I would say, because you want to like pre-drill the holes for the to go through the drawing board. But really, like, I have a couple of those that I use, like one for drawing, one for painting or whatever, and really it's never done me wrong. The important thing is that you actually screw it down to the table, because then you've got this like ultimate stability. That's why I actually don't like most tabletop easels, because they're not like made to be screwed into the table. I mean, I guess you could, screw like a regular like mini H-frame into the table, but then I don't know. I don't see like buying one of those. Probably a lot of you out there actually have one of those. So I'm telling you like what the easel you bought is like trash, but it's not trash. It's just I think that a homemade version is actually a little bit better. Right, let's see here. Questions. Hello from WAJSJS is, I think, in Washington. Abalone Gyro. Wow, I'm definitely not pronouncing that right. Yes, working from a model is so hard. I don't know if I should correct things or if the model moved. Well, yeah, this is the kind of art of it, is the kind of decision making. The choice is what do you keep, what do you move. I think it boils down to your confidence in the construction and proportion of the body. At least it boiled down to that for me. When I was really just drawing visually, just trying to like make something that rendered out or looked, similar enough to what I was looking at from a value or shape perspective, I found myself chasing all the time. I never really settled on poses. I would just always chase. By the time I started like constructing things properly, then you get a sense of like what something is supposed to look like, and you make it look like that. And it doesn't have to be, the big knock against it when I was at school was, oh, if you construct the body, then you're going to draw it how you think it is, not how it really is. And the brass tacks fact of the matter is that no matter what you're going to do, you're going to draw the model the way you think it is. Because building up the body through visual impression is not too dissimilar from building up through construction. It's just another like schemata that gets you from A to B. Anyway, the point I want to make is confidence in proportion and construction is what leads to certainty when you're blocking something in. Let me just get a sip of water here. Maggie says, do you have any tips or resources that could help translate classical drawing methods to animal subjects? I sometimes struggle with all the texture and complexity of fur, feathers, etc. Resources in terms of I don't really know a lot of artists in my genre that deal with that specifically. There is an artist that I know does a lot of work. It's a lot of like concept work though. But I feel like he has a really good grasp on like how texture interacts with form. That's an artist called Will Weston. You can find him on Instagram at Will Weston, or at Will Weston Studio maybe. But that's probably the closest I could get you to a resource about that. Otherwise, it's just something kind of out of my wheelhouse. Not something I'm like super familiar with. Let's see. Limo is saying, nice shirt. Yeah, no, it's a new shirt, so it's colorful. Yeah. And he's asking, or Limo, he or she is asking, did you ever use Da Vinci brushes? I think back in Florence, I might have had some hog bristle Da Vinci's. Didn't love them, didn't hate them. They were brushes. JD Anarchy is saying, I'm stuck on practicing and I can't seem to actually do any finished drawings. Any advice on how to break out of the practice cycle and start doing finished work again? It's likely, JD, that what's happening is that your goalposts are shifting here, are moving a bit, and it's becoming kind of harder to hit them. There's this metric that vision is always ahead of execution. And that means essentially like the more that you learn, the further the distance you see between you and where you actually want to be, because you're refining, you're gaining a greater capacity to actually even theorize what work should be or where it should go eventually. So this distance is unlikely to change. In terms of like finished work, I think there's a lot of ways that you can feel like your work is unfinished. The primary way that I found to have a problem with work in what I've done, and of course, like I can only say this because I'm not looking at your work, so I don't know which of the many different ways that a work can be unfinished, your work feels unfinished. When I was studying, again, I've said over and over and over, so much of it was shape-based, right? It was light shape, shadow shape, get the shapes to interact, get the shapes accurate, find the proportion through shapes and triangulation, etc. Sorry. You know what, I'm like talking so much, I like lose oxygen. I have to like yawn it in. In any event, I was I always had this problem, like feeling like, yeah, my work like always felt unfinished. And I'd spend hours and hours, 75 hours, 80 hours, like trying to make this drawing, and it just wouldn't finish. And I could not for the life of me figure out what it was. It was essentially that my shapes were too flat. And a big part of what we associate with finished work is something that has form. Now, it doesn't have to have like a miraculous, voluminous three-dimensional form, but it also can't look totally flat. Now, I'm saying can't, I'm using absolutes here. Let's say that if you're making realist work, stuff that looks like stuff, you're trying to mimic in a way the world that you're seeing. The world that you're seeing has dimension, or three dimensions, right? It has depth, and you need to kind of bring that into your work. This can be as simple as making sure that the edges of the forms of your subjects turn, that the values there darken to create that sense of form, that you're literally creating an impression of volume. For me, that was a big hang up, and essentially was a really fairly simple solution. Christian Georgiev says, one of our models at my academy once went to a nearby restaurant during her 30-minute lunch break and spent an hour and a half there. She didn't even pick up her phone. That sounds like you got some super, you got big model problems there. I feel the pain of your model coordinator at that school. I couldn't imagine, like, so a lot of schools that will have that have live models, you have to have a model coordinator. Usually it falls to someone who does some other form of admin too. Like where I went to school, it was the person who did payroll, also did model coordination. And I mean, you want to talk about like herding cats. Like I would not want to be a model coordinator. It sounds like one of the hardest jobs at an academy. Sumya Dip Day says, hey Stephen, is there any other way to buy your courses other than Patreon? I don't have access to a credit card. Ooh, that's a cool question. Hey, so coming up, there will exist a website called Atelier Forum. I'm bringing this website into being solely for the purpose of, well, anyway, for me, like my purpose in it is so that I can teach figure drawing again, because I can't really do it on Patreon because there's NSFW like issues with that. If I incorporate nudity, then there's nudity, and that renders my page like a whole different entity. I'm making Atelier Forum so I can teach my figure drawing masterclass. It's going to be everything from the ground up, all the stuff that I've over the years figured out about figure drawing, all the solutions that I've come up with to make it work, make it practical, make it apply to everything I do. It's all going to be in there, and I'm very excited about it. It's not here yet. Probably we're a month out from launch. On that website, there will be an opportunity to also purchase courses that are delivered in a slightly different way. So it's on a platform that is created specifically for online teaching. So all of the software, all the user interface and stuff is all geared towards exactly what I do. Whereas Patreon, they're for everybody. Patreon is essentially for anybody who does anything can go there and use that as a platform to engage with their fans and create a following and make a living, just like everybody deserves to make a living. That's what Patreon is. That's why actually I've had to make a separate navigation site for my patrons, because I have I have so many tutorials that if I just use Patreon's interface, I don't know if anybody would really find what they were looking for. So, and that's not really Patreon's fault. They have to be there for everybody. So not everybody wants the same kind of interface. So they have to be kind of generic a little bit. And the more you do something, the more you have like kind of specific needs. And that's what I had. So that's why StephenBaumanArtwork.com exists. Is really, it's 99% just a navigation site. Kajabi is going to exist Kajabi is the platform. Atelier Forum is going to exist specifically for the delivery of courses in a really specific orchestrated way that is really suited to exactly what online students need. So it'll be there. I'll probably also be adding my other lessons to that, because I know that some people maybe you don't like subscription models, even though the price is very low. You just don't like to subscribe to stuff. You'd rather buy it outright. Or you realize that, because it's a subscription, things come, things go. Maybe you want like permanent access to something forever. That's what Atelier Forum will do. So yes, it's coming. And yeah, I guess just stay tuned. Let's see. MJ Artwork is asking, how do we improve faster? I know some artists who draw a lot but seem to be still at the same level. How can we avoid this? Or what's causing this? A lot of times, repeated mistakes are about, frankly, like not receiving feedback, not being pushed. It's one of the things actually I find a little bit fun about commissions, is that there's this like approval process, and because as a professional you understand that it's a collaborative effort, you don't send that approval at the end. You send that approval, at like the 3/4 mark, right? So they see what's going on, they see the composition developing, and they go, you know what? I always pictured this in a slightly different way, or I always pictured ... in a slightly different way, and essentially like that pushes me to kind of make those kinds of changes. Or even like I've had somebody say like, I just want more stuff. I want like to expand the picture out. I want to see more of the shirt, which I was like, I don't want to see more of the shirt, but she wanted to see more of the shirt. So I added that into the drawing. It's not something I would have done, and I worked longer and harder than I would have. And so it added that kind of extra level of motivation that maybe I didn't have about it. The other thing that can cause that, what can cause a repetition of mistakes? I don't know. I mean, we all do kind of repeat mistakes a little bit. If you're missing some foundational, concept, a mistake I used to make all the time was the distance in between the brow ridge and the bottom of the nose. I'd make that too long every single time, but that's because I was like missing the constructive planes of the nose that actually show you in such a clear way, like how the glabella connects through to the planes of the nose. You can barely make it the wrong length once you understand like how to construct it properly. So likely it could be something like that. Oh, and in terms of like getting better faster, it's just about repeating. The more variables that you change when you're working, the more you're adjusting to variables and the less that you're kind of perfecting your craft. I'm not saying that you never want to change variables, but if you're looking to accelerate learning, stick with the variables. Don't change them, right? Stick with the process. Don't change it. Repeat it many, many, many times, and that's going to accelerate your learning. It's not for everybody. Some people just want to like experiment all the time. I kind of liked experimenting. So, and I do feel like, that slowed down my progress as well. Yeah. Let's see. This is the name. I'm just not going to get it right. Abalone Giro says, there's a student in the studio who loves making conversation with the models during the poses, and then she complains that her painting doesn't come out well. Don't be the person in the studio who's talking to the model when everybody else is trying to draw. Don't be that person. Just don't do it. Let's see. Paul Aguilar says, do you have any tips for getting better at identifying a color and mixing it? Is it just practice? No, it is not just practice. And as far as tips, tips, it's so weird because colors a very conceptual world, and it follows very clear patterns. I'm working on a color mixing tutorial, so it's not that I want to save up the tips. It's just that the tips are very practical, like the things that you have to do, and it's just much easier to demonstrate than it is to conceive of how to say it without you seeing what's happening. It's very easy to show and very difficult to say. So complementary colors are your friends. I'll say that. That's one thing to know about creating appropriate flesh tone mixtures. Let's see. JD Anarchy is asking, have you ever heard of a book called An Atlas of Anatomy for Artists by Fritz Schneider? And what do you think of it if you have? Truth is, I've probably seen it, but the name doesn't ring a bell, so I don't necessarily have an opinion on it at the moment. Yet. Let's see. Angelo Miguel says, greetings from the Philippines. Hello, Angelo. I've been reading The Practice and Science of Drawing. What does he mean when he said our academic training's aim should be a searching accuracy? I would appreciate slightly more context before I venture out to say exactly what Harold Speed means in saying that. And I can't call to mind the exact passage when he was talking about this. But just speculating without that knowledge and without that context, a searching accuracy, I think, is a good way to describe what I think a lot of teachers will understand about students, is that a process that is well conceived should lead to accuracy. Which is to say that accuracy is something that grows or is an ultimate aim rather than something that maybe exists at each stage, right? Because in your initial moments, your drawing can only resemble your subject so much. But if you accept this process and this search, and as I said, it's like a well conceived of process, it should lead you, that search should lead you to a conclusion that is accuracy. But put the context into the comments. Give me a couple sentences around it, just so I'm sure of what part of the book it's in and what he's talking about precisely. Let's see. Milad says, ciao, Milad. Leonie Knowles says, hi from Australia. Thank you for these demos and your Patreon stuff. Hey, no problem. Thank you, Australians, for the show Mr. In Between, because it's a really good watch. Let's see. Valentine Haraklanyi says, do you ever work with ink, and what is your opinion about it? Greetings from Hungary. Hello back to you. Have I ever? Well, I mean, I have worked with ink. Actually, I was talking with a friend of mine the other day about, in art school, you know, in art college, which I look back on this and it just, I can't believe it sometimes. But you have like these drawing survey courses, which, you know, you go through and they, like, for instance, they try and teach you, I guess, show you all these different kind of ways that you could draw. So one day they give you graphite. The next day they're giving you, I remember, because this is ink, they'd give you like this, you'd shave down a wooden stick into this point, and you'd dip your stick in some India ink, and you'd scratch around on a paper with that. And like, that was like, ooh, you can understand like ink drawing like this. And I remember being so like incredibly unimpressed with this as like a lesson that I was supposed to learn. I think ink wash and ink drawing's amazing. It's got so much range. I mean, it's the confluence of like watercolor and drawing. In fact, with Cornelia just today, we finally sat down and we recorded what will be the first episode of the revamped, rebranded Atelier Forum podcast. And we were each bringing in like a topic to talk about, right? So each time, you know, we have a show, it's going to be, we're each going to bring some topic and show it to the other one, introduce it to the other one, and we'll kind of chop it up and talk about it. Anyway, the thing that I brought up, and I'm not going to spoil the whole show because you got to watch that if you want to know what it's about. But it was about Pietro Annigoni, and it was about ink wash. So I'm a huge fan of ink drawings and ink wash. I think it has a tremendous ceiling in terms of representation and a really beautiful mood. I myself don't engage a lot with it, but it's just a matter of, you know, it's just not a part of my workflow at the moment. But I really love it. Eirik Arneson says, do you have any thoughts on drawing for a sculptor? Sculpture students will often refer to the 5-week charcoal long pose as charcoal painting. You're in charge. How would you rectify the situation? How would I rectify the situation? Well, for starters, right, one of my reflections was always, when I was at the academy, is that the sculptors in the sculpture studio did better drawings. And it didn't have to do with the drawing staff, the drawing instructive staff, which, no offense to them, they're all great people. They draw perfectly well. But it had to do with the fact that they were so form oriented, right? You get these drawings that came out of the drawing and painting studio that were like so flat because they were so like shape based. It was just these shapes mashed together, a little bit of halftone squidging around at the edge. The sculptors were like full of these like massive rippling forms. So first of all, like I hold sculptors' drawings in a very high regard. Now, why sculptors are referring to this as charcoal painting, I think that the enthusiasm over charcoal sometimes, I'm going to get into like some trouble talking about this, as I don't want to. Charcoal drawing is great, but it's not always used for the thing that figure drawing is like the best about. When I went to school, it was like, make the blacks as black as you can, make the lights as light as you can, get the most extreme contrast you can. And that's kind of what was done. Whereas like charcoal has a kind of fluidity that offers you the possibility to make a lot of softness and a lot of volume, like very easily. So in terms of the sculptors referring to it as charcoal painting, I think it probably sounds like what they're doing is it's really like this value-based expression. And for sculptors, I think that you should be drawing a lot more for a form-based expression. In which case, charcoal's good, graphite's good. There's a lot of different drawing materials that are kind of good for that. If I was in charge, how would I rectify the situation? First of all, 5 weeks is probably like way too long to work on a drawing. I mean, we're talking 75 hours to work on a drawing, unless you're drawing like half life size. I'm not sure that amount of time necessarily makes sense. I would probably remove or largely remove backgrounds from the equation, especially dark backgrounds, because again, of that 75 hours of making your charcoal painting, the amount of time that you spend just getting an even flat background is immense and not necessarily understandable. Even a mid-tone background, even a light background would produce a situation where that 75 hours would actually be spent working on the figure itself, for which charcoal would offer you the speed to kind of get your job done, get your form expressed and accomplished, get your search undertaken in a really efficient way. Much better, I think, than dark background drawing. So that's what I would change if I was president. Let's see. By the way, Eirik, what academy are you going to? Let me know, just so I know who I'm talking about. Emily Fossum Art says, can you tell us what your palette colors are here? Interesting watching you mix all your colors in one spot. Does this make your painting more harmonious? Yeah, like in general, Alla Prima painting, what it has going for it, right, is that all of the color values are conceived in one moment, right? So your chances of creating a kind of a disharmony are certainly diminished. It's possible to do, but it's a little bit diminished because everything is kind of active. Like you lay in the entire picture with one conception of color and you kind of build outward from there. The colors I'm using on my palette here are titanium white, not lead white. Not because I don't like lead white, but I find in Alla Prima painting, in particular painting on this oil paper, it doesn't have enough opacity, lead white, to kind of get to the place where I want to go from a color value perspective. So titanium white, yellow brown is a hue that Old Holland has put together, that has it's pretty strong tinting, still has an ochre-y vibe about it, and it's a little bit less opaque than yellow ochre, so that's why I use that. Alizarin crimson is the red, raw umber is the brownish one that is on the upper right hand corner, and you got cobalt blue and ivory black. Realistically for this, I think I touched the cobalt blue maybe once. And I just have it on there because if you're going to have a blue, then have that blue. Let's see. Emily Fossum Art is also asking, can you talk about doing this versus having pre-mixed piles of paint or mixing highlights and shadows separately? It's just a time consumption issue. Also, and it's kind of an experience issue. The mixing up of color values is a great practice, and I did it for many, many, many years. However, eventually when you're quite in control of things, and I'm not perfect, I'm not like the greatest painter that's out there, but eventually you get control of your materials and your means in such a way that it's possible to sorry, one second. That it's possible to get to a place where you can kind of mix it up with your brush. It's kind of, I do it this way kind of because I can. I could do it with pre-mixes as well. And eventually when I do teach about color, it's going to be about color mixing essentially on the palette. Karen Late says, hi from Sunset Beach, North Carolina. Hello. And VJ Kumar says, hello, Stephen. And then in his next comment says, after bark drawing, moving to plaster cast or cast drawing, how do we step up or set up a plaster cast at home without getting affected by changing light? Like, how do you set up a plaster cast? You're going to want a shadow box, right? Let's go back to the diagrams. A shadow box, essentially, and I'm just going to draw this out here really quick. And I'm going to draw it pretty badly, and then I'm going to show you my bad drawing. How's that for the truth? All right. Okay, hang on one second. I'm almost there. I've almost got my shadow box drawn. And it's really bad. It's so bad. All right. And I'm going to draw like a little light source in here as well. Right. So if you want to set up your cast, you're going to need a shadow box, which is 2 vertical walls and a floor like so. The vertical walls are attached via the floor or the whatever the bottom of it. And they're also kind of screwed into each other. Then I'm just going to draw a plaster cast here. I'm going to use the cast of the eye as my model. You're then going to hang the plaster cast onto one of the walls. This will allow you to control how the light is coming into the shadow section of the face, which actually, let me just go ahead and correct this. In a shadow box built in the way that this one is showing, what you probably want to have is light coming from the open direction of the side of the shadow box, right? What you're going to want to do is also paint the shadow box probably black, or at least like a slightly darker value, so that not much light kind of gets into the cast. Set that on top of a table or on top of a specially made kind of cabinet that gets it up to kind of eye level, and then you can actually work side by side if you want to. What did you think of the drawing? Was it as bad as I said? Probably. Yeah, it was. Let's see. Yeah, Milad is asking, what's the paper used for this painting? Folks, it's coming out soon. The folks at Legion Paper have made this oil painting paper that I love. It's not yet commercially available. They have sent me a bunch of samples that I'm using up rapidly. And so like I'm waiting and waiting and waiting for it to come out commercially. So Legion Paper, those are the people that made Stonehenge as well. I've made this oil painting paper. It's great. I think in October, so next month, it's supposed to start being commercially available. As soon as it is, I will have links for it everywhere so that you can get a hold of it. Let's see. Yeah, Limo actually answered the question just below that comment, so thank you for that. Lloyd Ranjith Coronel says, whatever happened to the book, The War of Art by Pressfield? Any thoughts? Ever happened? Oh, did I ever happen to read the book? No, The War of Art is not a book I've read. Give me your 1-sentence review. Like, what's the sales pitch? Why do we want to read it? Kelly Franklin says, Jennifer Gennari has amazing resources for painting animals classically. Yeah, the only reason, actually, I probably didn't mention anything about Jen Gennari was just because, like, with her very kind of direct painting method, it reminded me first of how texture is applied to form the question, rather than like if you're painting it. I mean, essentially, you can paint things in such a way that everything turns into a brushstroke. But if you're trying to apply textures to form, I think that's something that you can understand more clearly, like actually on a drawing level, if I'm totally honest. And this is just my opinion. Everybody can have opinions. But that's why I mentioned Will Weston, because I see him using this concept in his teaching all the time, because he's teaching students to draw from their heads a lot. So it's a lot of like understand the form, apply like a texture concept, and apply lighting to that texture concept, which for me is like where like true understanding comes from. So that was my reasoning. Jen Janari also is wonderful as well. Vijay Kumar says, please make a Patreon video on how to set up a cast or any still life composition at home with a light source. We can work on and off without changing daylight. Yeah. Is that a cool Patreon video? Does everybody want like a Patreon video just about setting things up? I think that maybe integrating some information like that into a lesson about it, maybe making it like a kind of an ancillary thing that's like attached onto the side of a tutorial. Maybe just talking about some of the things you want to do. The problem I always have with these, right? This is what happens when I make those videos or I make these recommendations. It's the same as like when I recommend a palette to my students for a project. So I say, all right, so this is a palette you want. You want flake white, yellow brown, vermilion extra, old Hollands, alizarin crimson, raw umber, cobalt blue, and black. Immediately, what I get is a barrage of questions saying, what are all the colors that I can substitute for those colors? At which time I have to say, like, I don't know. I use these colors because these colors are really effective. And a lot of times I'll try and answer. I'll say, well, yeah, you can kind of change this one for that one. But anything that you do, as far as your palette is concerned, like changing pigments, changing colors, it affects the performance. And the reason that I recommend the palette is because I know how it performs, and I also know how it performs together, right? Color harmonies come out of a palette in a way because of the palette. So substituting all these, putting in cad red instead of vermilion, it changes a lot. So can you substitute? Sure, you can substitute anything for anything else. It will perform really differently. So, you got to be aware of that. When, I set up a cast, like, I would want to recommend the absolute best way to do it. But that's going to be space intensive. It's going to be lighting intensive. It becomes a kind of a weird project. So if I make this video, which I will make some version of, I'm just going to recommend what the absolute best way that you can do it is. And then I think everybody's got to improvise. Artists, we improvise, right? I learn through improvisation all the time. You see something that's done, you try to do something similar. So I can give you the optimal situation, and you can improvise outward from there. How about that? Does that sound, would anybody want that? I don't know. Let's see. Gurav Dutta says, I'm such a big fan of yours. I wish to improve my anatomy. Any practical advice, sir? Anatomy comes from drawing anatomy. That's really the only way to improve about it. Theoretical knowledge is useful in maybe some ways, but it's far from the most useful thing. Yeah. Let's see. Other questions coming in. Vijay also says, please make more intermediate graphite projects on Patreon. Vijay wants a lot of content. Yeah, no, I hear you. I'm making as much as I possibly can. I mean, as far as intermediate content is concerned, you can't go wrong with the Pat Burns video that, like I said, is only available on my Patreon for the rest of this month. After that, it's gone, and it will not be available there again. It will be available other places for a significantly higher price. So if you wanted to study that one, now's the time. Or later, and then you can download it and buy it or whatever you want. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Abalone Giro is asking, are you still going to do Patreon after Atelier Forum? Totally. Completely. 100%. Patreon is great. It's great also because like I have a pretty high motor for content production. Like I like to produce new stuff all the time. And Atelier Forum is really a side project that is serving, for me, is serving one very specific need: the need to have autonomy so that I can teach figure drawing. There will also be like a lot of other artists that have work there as well, like lessons and things there. But that's just like a side thing that is a product of I have the platform, so I may as well like host other things there also. But I'm still on Patreon. Have no worries about that. I love the pacing of Patreon, how it keeps me productive. Grace M is saying, "Hi Stephen, are you using any mediums, linseed oil or turpentine in these first painting stages?" I use linseed oil. I don't actually use any kind of solvent in any of the painting that I do. I actually don't even use solvent in cleaning my brushes. I just use a kind of strong dish soap that cuts probably most of the oil. So unless you're like a real like brush fanatic, you probably don't need to use like turpentine or mineral spirits to kind of clear out the rest of the oil. I will say also, however, that it's okay to like use mineral spirits and things or whatever terps that you want to use. It's just about ventilation. You need really good ventilation, and I don't have that, so I don't use it. Yeah, oh yeah. So for this stage of the painting, what I have just a little medium cup, and because I'm painting vertically here, my palette's vertical. The only reason you can't see the medium cup is just because I can't have it vertical. So it's just at the bottom of the palette, and I'm just dipping into it a little bit. With these Alla Prima block-ins on this oil paper in particular, I use way more medium than I normally would. Like on an oil ground, I would block in with probably almost no medium whatsoever. But with these, you need a little bit to kind of push the paint around. Let's see. Victor Adolfo says, following AG's question, is training with purpose more important than training every day? More important than. This is a little bit of a does it have to be either or kind of question. If you train with purpose every day, then you're going to be doing great. But yeah, I would say probably training with purpose is better than. How often do you train with purpose? Actually, would be my question. If you train with purpose once a year, I would say that it's not as important as working every day. I mean, each one can lead you places. You know, it just depends upon, you know, what kind of learner you are, what kind of student you are, what kind of person you are. You know, it's hard to say. However, you are drawing an interesting, you know, what's the word, comparison here, in that, you know, that repetition, you know, we can repeat and repeat and repeat. If we don't have the right tools, we're just kind of repeating the wrong stuff. So that can, yeah, I mean, what you're asking essentially is, you know, is education important? Like, is guidance important? And I think in just about every genre, every part of our lives, we understand guidance is important. When I get a new piece of computer gear and I need to use it, the first thing I do is I go to YouTube and I Google, how do I use the Sony ZV-1? And then I watch tutorial after tutorial, camera setting tutorials, this, that, the other thing, to familiarize myself with how to use this tool, because guidance is important. I don't know the landscape, you know, within the user interface on this camera. I need to know what it is. Somebody else knows. Maybe they can speed up my process. So yeah, like, guidance is super important if you want to learn effectively. You know, if I just dove into that camera without any guidance, probably there'd be a lot of blind spots, a lot of functionality that I wouldn't even know exists. You know, I would just be using half of the camera, right? But because I got guidance, I can use all of the camera, I can use all the settings, I can use it exactly how I want to use it. I can be a lot more specific about the stuff that, you know, the shots that I get or the video that I capture or whatever. So, you know, between self-taught and guidance, I would always recommend guidance, actually. And it's not that you can't do without it. It's just, again, with the camera metaphor, you're kind of going to be seeing half of the picture probably. Let's see. Madeline Pater says, thanks for the news about Atelier Forum. No worries. Vijay Kumar says, will your Atelier forum for figure drawing have subscription option like Patreon? Patreon is an affordable platform. Yeah, Patreon is an affordable platform. That's one of the things, by the way, I really, it's one of the things I love about Patreon is that because of how it works, I don't actually have to charge a lot for it. So that means anybody can jump in. There's once you actually see what the value of it is, there's almost no, if you want to learn to draw, there's like no real great reason to not do it. Like even just to try it out, like, oh, I jumped into like 300 hours of tutorials for $10. Like, who's gonna say no to that? It's not a value proposition question. It's just a matter of like exposure. If you see it and you want to draw like that, it's worth a shot. The figure drawing masterclass is not going to be offered via subscription, partly because I can't. Like a subscription model requires how to put this. Like, there's no such thing as like a passive subscription model. Like, you have to be there on the platform, working, engaging, interacting, helping, doing this, doing that, doing the other thing. This will be something that is a 4-day intensive workshop that will be available to participants, for as long as they want. But it's not going to be something where I'm engaged in it 12 months a year. I'm going to do it one time a year, and that's really all the time that I can do because I'm also doing Patreon. So that's why it's not going to be a subscription model. It's because, again, I can't tend that garden while I'm also tending this garden. I think a big mistake that, a lot of artists make when they're kind of getting onto social, trying to make their own business on social, is that they try to be everywhere, like on all platforms at all times. And you can't really do it. You got to kind of find the one that fits your niche and make some amount of commitment to it. For me, for a long time, that was Instagram. And actually, I'm realizing now, what do I, I'm like pausing, like Instagram's watching. But I think I'd actually rather be on YouTube because it suits my content more. Like the stuff that I do takes a long time. Instagram caps at like 60 seconds, unless you're on IGTV. But does anybody really watch IGTV? Really? Yeah. Anyway. Drew T is asking, do you paint in acrylics too? I did when I was in college, but I haven't in many, many years. Let's see. Beth asks, can you expand on what to research for getting the distance between the brow ridge and the bottom of the nose correct? I definitely struggle with that. Well, essentially, we're talking about, the three basic, or rather four basic planes of the nose, the structure of the nose. All of this, by the way, is synopsized in a Centerline construction tutorial. So, Beth, if you are already subscribed to my Patreon, go to the Centerline construction lecture. It's about 2 hours, but really it explains literally everything you need to know about exactly the question you're asking. If you're not a subscriber and you don't want to subscribe, there's actually a short version of the video on YouTube that covers some of what I'm talking about, which is totally free for everybody to watch. So there's an in-depth version, there's a shallow version, and the version I can give you here is essentially it's understanding how to utilize information early on in a drawing, because that's a mistake that happens in the first stages of the drawing, right? It's a mistake that you make in the early stages and you never recover from. Partially also because it's like in the middle of the face. You can't lower the eyes or raise the nose without changing a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So usually when the nose is wrong, it stays wrong. I mean, Sargent would have said, like, when you get the structure of the head wrong, you just have to repaint it because no amount of like fiddling is going to get you to like an accurate construction. Duran would have said that as well. But it's about, constructing through planes early on and having visual landmarks that stand in for, or rather construction-based landmarks that stand in for the visual appearance early on. Fix that mistake early, basically. Devin is asking, I was taking a drawing class for fun at university, and the instructor made us draw portraits with our eyes closed. I dropped the class. Devin, I was talking about this as you can imagine, I feel like every one of these things that comes up and saying, I was just talking about this the other day. I was literally talking about this the other day with I was either with Cornelia or it was with a friend of mine, Steve, in the States. I think actually I know it was. I was talking with a friend of mine, Steve, in the States. He's actually the person I first went to Florence with when I went to study at the academy. And like we went through the same college as well, and so like a lot of the same teaching would have, before the academy, we also had the same kind of teaching in a way. And it's this blind contour drawing where what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to like look at something, right? And you have your pen and your paper or whatever, and you just draw what you think the thing is without looking at it, right? So you try and draw something without looking at it. It's blind contour drawing. I mean, I'm not one prone to extremes, but it's one of the dumbest ideas I've come across in drawing education. I'm not sure what we're supposed to extract from it. Or at the very least, if there's a thing we're trying to extract from it, I know there's a better way to extract it. But yeah, blind contour drawing was a funny one. I mean, hey, listen, there's a lot of ideas out there. I know I'm shortchanging this. I know I'm making fun of it. If it's something that you appreciate, listen, I don't want to make fun of you. Like, actually, like some kind of cool aesthetic looking stuff can come out of it. But like looking at it as a teacher, like, and I look at when I'm teaching, I look at everything as optimizing education. Like, how can the most people get the clearest idea of what the lesson is, right? Like that's usually how I format, that's like my mission statement when I'm developing content for students. And I look at blind contour drawing and I just think, come on, this is not the way. This is not. I mean, we're trying to develop hand-eye coordination, right? Mind-eye coordination. There's a lot of other ways to do that. So yeah, sorry if I'm offending anybody out there that loves blind contour drawing, but I'm out on it. Let's see. Old Dirty Master says, which that's a great screen name. You step out of a time machine into Paris circa 1880. Which atelier do you seek out? Whoa! What an absolute question. Wow. Gold star for you, pal. Step out of a time machine into Paris circa 1880. Which atelier do you seek out? I would absolutely 100% want to study with Bonnat. Léon Bonnat was, I believe, Bonnat was teaching at the Académie Julienne. Please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that. But he was I got to know Bonnat through a student of his, which was Albrecht Edefeld, who was, I think he was a Finnish painter. Is he Finnish or Swedish? I think he was Finnish. In any event, Edefeld, I got to know some of his figurative studies from Bonnat's class, and the breadth and design of them was fantastic. I got to know Bonnat's work, and he's someone who is just so, like, you see design that is powerful, right? And it's always tricky to hear these things in the abstract. People would tell me about some artists, and they talk about this and they talk about that, and it's powerful, this and that. And you see the work, and you go like, oh, that doesn't really look at all like I thought it would work. So I know that when I'm saying that the design of Bonnat's work is powerful, I know that we're all thinking of something different. I get that. That's fine. But when I think about structure and form and design, and choosing like a brutally elegant design, Bonnat's work is so much of that to me. And to study with him, I think absolutely would have been, that's where I would have gone. So if it was the Académie Julienne, that's where I absolutely would have gone. Great question. Let's see. Limo is asking, I want to buy this drawing book by Harold Speed. Can you say how helpful it is for representational artists? Greetings from Germany. All right. Hello to you in Germany. Let's see how helpful it is. The Practice and Science of Drawing by Harold Speed is really great. And first of all, by way of comparison, I'll tell you one of the reasons why I think it's so great. There's also a book by Vanderpool, which is a cool book. Everybody knows the Vanderpool book. Probably you have it. If it's figure drawing something, whatever, Vanderpool. I find Vanderpool's approach to writing about drawing very much to have that like 19th century spirit of almost scientific analysis of a craft. So he's very incredibly dryly descriptive. And I get that, and that's cool, but I found it very hard to read. Whereas Harold Speed manages to communicate also his enthusiasm for drawing inside of his drawing book. And so that's something that carried me along a lot more easily than Vanderpool, for instance. Excuse me, sorry. In terms of what it gives you, so many of these drawing books will give you a lot of things in a very similar way. And I think that one of the things that's cool about them is actually when you start to cross-reference in between them. Like recently, I've been going a lot back into Solomon J. Solomon's book. And you just find all these things that that you've known either through other sources or just through your own study. All these concepts, all these ideas that you've understood very well, and you find them reiterated in a different kind of language. Now, not literal different language, but using different words, different formations of these ideas, which actually, it represents a very interesting thing that I went through at the academy, that students still go through at the academy, that actually online students, oddly enough, probably experience in the extreme. And that is, like, so when I was a student, I had critiques 5 days a week. Very often from 2 different teachers in the same day. And then in the evening, oftentimes like a third teacher, an evening drawing. So you would get all these different versions of advice that could literally be about the exact same thing, but they were all totally different in their formation, right? And how they were described to you. And as a student, you find that very difficult because you feel like, oh, but you're all telling me like different things. You're not like in sync with each other. Like, I don't understand. It's confusing because you're telling me seemingly different things. Now, this is a problem of the student, actually, because if your mentality as a student is to wonder why things don't work or how things do not work together, your aim is going to lead you towards that. Whereas as a student, once I realized and once you realize that what you're really searching for is actually how things can work. If you receive an advice and instead of saying, oh, that doesn't make sense, you say, how does that make sense? How can I make that make sense? Then you are always going to be getting like the most out of the advice that you receive. And so what I eventually discovered is that they're all telling me something in a different way. And that's helpful because seeing it from only one perspective doesn't guarantee that I really understand the breadth of the subject, because like we're all kind of different. So having different teachers actually ensures in the long run that a student has a much greater chance of actually getting to the truth, getting to understanding the project, because likely one of these 3 people, in the case of those critiques each day, one of these people more than likely communicates in a similar way to me that I can better understand. Like if somebody came at me with a lot of like flowery language and poetry about art and this and that, and they could be talking about drawing and talking about shadow and light, but using these really rosy terms, I'd probably like check out and be like, yeah, okay, I don't know. Yeah, I guess the beauty of transition or whatever. Like I need somebody to come at me with technical, like hard technical terms that I can follow really, really well. So you do want to find a teacher that like vibes with you, that communicates in the way that makes sense to you, right? And that's what that multi-teacher, what's the word? That multi-teacher environment, like what that goes further to ensure. And so for online students, you're going to get like a lot of ideas from a lot of different places. If you just sit on YouTube and watch drawing videos all day, you're going to get 100 different ideas about like how to draw. Likely, where most of us are kind of talking about a similar thing. If you're watching, people in a similar genre, we're all going to format that in a very different way. We're going to communicate it in a different way. Listen to each of them. Look for the things that overlap. Search for like why the advice works instead of why it's contradictory. Anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox for now, as I'm sure that's really tedious for everybody to hear. Valerie Andrade says, hello from Brazil. I'm taking up oil painting on my own again after 15 years. Canvas paper is brand new to me. Seems great for storage. Is it only good for practicing? Yeah, well, a generic thing like canvas paper, a lot of people make it. A lot of different companies make some version of that. Depending upon what version you're using, you could be using a really nice one or a really bleh one. In the case of very nice ones, naturally, it's going to be a little bit more archival. It's going to last a little bit longer and probably perform a little bit better. In the case of the really bad ones, the opposite is probably true. So, in general, yeah, like the permanence of your work, it usually has a correlation to how much you pay for it, frankly. Like if you pay a good amount for something, it probably is going to be made of better stuff than if you got a really cheap version of it. And in the long run, in fine art materials, like these things kind of matter. Like whether something is pH neutral versus pH buffered is a huge difference, right? pH neutral just means it's neutral now. pH buffered means it is not going to turn acidic over time, where something that's just pH neutral could. So like little differences like that in manufacture can, down the road lead to, performance over time issues, if that makes sense. Let's see. All right, Shiziz says, hello from South Africa. Hello, hello, hello. I just want to know, I want to study bark drawings, but the only way I can get the book is on my phone. Is it worth learning you don't have to get the book to do the bark studies. The book by Philip Ackerman is very much the story of the recovery of bargs. It's a story about bargs. It's a catalogue raisonné for barg. Practicing the actual bargs themselves, like I provide reproductions on my Patreon. I mean, if you really probably wanted to, you could track down the best quality ones that you could find online and use those. I think the important thing with bargs, and this is what I try to stress over and over and over, both in the free YouTube videos that I've made and the paid Patreon videos that I've made, it's not just about drawing the barg. There are a series of ideas locked or baked into these barg drawings. A language that is baked into them. You need the key to that language. You need to know what the basis for studying barg was, what lessons you're expected to get out, what you're supposed to extract from them. It's the same thing that we were talking about earlier, that like you could draw like 100 bargs and maybe you get something out of them. For sure you'll get something out of them. But if you drew 5 bargs with the right concepts, the right ideas, the right vocabulary, the right kind of plan and knowledge before you go in of what you're supposed to get out, you can do in a much shorter time, what would take a lot longer if without it. But yeah, you don't need to buy the book. It's a very expensive book. It's a big book. It's a great book. Barg is fantastic. So if you can get it, that's fantastic, but it's not requisite. JD Anarchy says, are there any exercises to help with line work that you would suggest? Exercises with line work that you would suggest? I think that in general, I'm not sure if there's like necessarily like an exercise. I mean, it's difficult to like isolate that, right? What we used to do at the academy was I mean, it's kind of a limited advice that I'm giving, but it's just to say like to make drawings that exist only online. But that's kind of like, yeah, of course. But I think that one of the things that could be helpful about, embracing line is actually to not take on very long form projects. The linear work that I did initially in my studies was based on like kind of 2-hour drawings. So making drawings for which value is not the primary communicative force or goal, right? Eventually that, locking yourself into those narrow parameters will help you to work a little bit better in line. If you wanted to use your materials to help you with that, stark white paper and harder pencils, use your H's and your 2H's to draw with. Take the 2B's off the table. At that point, value is not really going to make an expression. You're only going to be able to work in a very narrow window of value, and hopefully also to exclude shadow and light from that exercise. Try to represent the figure in form. Eventually, this is a figure drawing thing, but anatomical analysis, for me, very much starts in line as well. But that's another conversation. Let's see. Eirik Arneson says, thank you for the answer. I studied and now teach sculpture at FAA. Oh, Eirik, exactly. So you know exactly what I'm talking about then. I wasn't sure, again, which school you're at, but yeah, it's no secret, of course, that the FAA is a strongly impression-based school, especially in the painting program. Whereas in the sculpture studio, you have people that have a sense. I mean, their eye is always looking for form. By the way, the video is about to, or has just zoomed forward about 30 minutes. This is just because there's so much time and I can only talk for so long. So I thought we'll zoom forward a little bit. You can see, by the way, how the form is starting to kind of take shape on this, just with these kind of tiles of value. But back to Eirik's comment. Yeah, he says that we're always looking to improve the connection between the drawing room and the sculpture room for our students. Yeah, I think that if I wanted to improve that connection, for sure, I would put a much stronger emphasis on linear design. And if there's anything, I don't want to be someone taking pot shots from the outside, but if there's something I would improve overall, with my experience there, would be a stronger presence of linear construction. For sculptors, I think it already exists. It's implicit because when you're working on your sculptures, in fact, as far as I understand it, I had some sculpture experience working there. But it all is like linear high points, that's the whole construction process. So line is very alive to you already, but you're not drawing, you're not drawing in 2D with it. I would strongly encourage that, because I think also line drawing, ironically, is actually a lot more like sculpture than I think mass drawing is. I mean, people would debate me on that, I understand, but I stand by what I'm saying. Let's see. Petroglyphotube. Sure, I didn't pronounce that right. He says, hello there. I'm Jose Manuel from Spain. I've noticed that in the last videos, you have submitted red vermilion for alizarin in your palette. Maybe because of the temperature of the colors in these specific photos. Thanks. Yeah, I'm at odds a little bit with vermilion right now. And it's mostly just because I felt like I was getting these kind of orangey tones that I didn't necessarily want. And it was partially due to working on white ground. I think that vermilion, I kind of prefer that when I have, say, a cooler imprimatura that I'm working on. On white, it tends to lean my temperature of my mixtures towards this kind of orangey place that I'm a lot less fond of. Yeah, so that's why. And also, I'm always looking for ways to simplify. And I was just trying to think, what can't I get here with alizarin? What am I missing with alizarin here? Let's see. Makis Cool says, hello, sir, from Greece. What's your opinion on black oil for a medium and in which stages to use it? Thank you very much. So black oil essentially is, it's a super dangerous oil to manufacture because it's boiled linseed oil, right? And it's boiled linseed oil that has what they call, I think they refer to as marigé, but essentially, right, they have lead oxide or something, lead inside the oil. So you get the oil, you get the lead powder, and you chuck it in there, and you essentially, well, you don't quite boil the oil, because you know what happens if you boil oil. It gets to this point and it starts like bubbling, and then it will go out into, it will burst out into the air and combust. So you're heating up the oil just to the place below where it will boil, and this naturally has like a darkening effect on the oil. And what is supposed to happen, and I say supposed to because recently I've kind of heard some things that have made me wonder about this. What's supposed to happen is that on a molecular level, the lead and the oil are bonding, and that this is conferring a more rapid drying property to the oil itself. Boiling the oil would also cause a partial oxygenation, which would also naturally result in oil drying faster as well. So how much of that rapidness are we getting out of the lead? Maybe some. I'd actually like to see something scholarly about this, and I haven't seen that. I only know anecdotally. I've used black oil before, and certainly I've gotten drying properties out of it. How much of it came from the lead versus the boiling, I don't know. You would want to use it, however, in the early stages of a painting where more rapid drying layers would be more helpful. And also because it's a very dark oil, you don't want to use it in the top layers, which are the final layers that you see, because it will have a tendency to darken your whites. So yeah, early stages of a painting, if at all. Really, like stuff with lead in it, usually there's just another way. There's usually a better way, you know. You can use sun thickened oil that's also going to dry faster and glossier. You can use a lot of different things that don't have lead in them. But if you want to use it, I mean, hey, I don't want to discourage you. Let's see. Lloyd Ranjith Corvinell says, just a book about stigma and resistance, which is related to a comment from earlier that unfortunately I don't remember. The War of Art, about stigma and resistance. Not a book that I've ever come across, but it sounds interesting, especially if it's art related. Let's see. Emily Fossum says, love the idea of a video on setting up our casts, all about the improvising. Yeah, thanks for these great learning resources. Yeah, no worries. So yeah, it's funny that actually, so I was filming yesterday some stretching and ink toning content for the upcoming Atelier tier lesson. And honestly, for stuff like that, to make like a 10-minute video, it probably takes me like an entire day to film and set up. Because basically, like I have a studio where, maybe I'll take some pictures of this, where I have set up, like I can just walk into the room, sit down, and start filming like a multicam tutorial without any setup, which, as somebody who does this for a living, like you have to do that. It's about removing resistance. I think even honestly for students, having a situation for yourself, building a situation for yourself where you can walk in the door, you can sit down or stand up or whatever, and start painting with as little resistance as possible, this is a huge asset, and something that I think if you're getting into this stuff, you got to respect setup time, because it takes energy, vital energy, and it takes time, and those are two resources that by the way, learning to paint and draw needs in massive excess. So in any event, so like filming this like short form content to get like 10 minutes of like really great video, it takes me like the whole day to set it up. So whether or not I can get in the time to also do a cast setup video, well, I don't want to make promises, but I like the idea of it. I really do like the idea of it. Let's see. Valerie Andrande says, how to set up a cast video sounds great. It would be kind of like your material video, just showing how you do it. Yeah, I feel like it's a multi-cam experience though, because what you're going to want is you're going to want a cam that's showing like the lighting situation and like how to craft that. But you got to be able to see that on the cast, and then you got to see like a zoom out shot of basically the studio, like where I'm doing that, which is going to be like probably a dark shot over the shoulder, showing the lighting position. Also, by the way, like all the filming that I do is with artificial. and it's artificial. That is, this is the other problem with like making recommendations. When you need continuous lighting for video, it can get very expensive very fast. So like the lighting that I'm using to do it, well, you know what? You're just gonna improvise. Just find a light that does something similar. Um, but yeah, so it'll involve like artificial lighting and positioning and things. Whereas you can do this stuff with natural light, and that can be like really, really beautiful as well. I mean, when I went through all my cast studies at school, it was always, when I did everything at school, it was natural light and live models. So like the highest degree of variance that you can have, that's kind of where a lot of my ideas come from. But yeah, it does sound like a great idea. Let's see if I can conceive of it and get it done. We'll see. Richard Oakley says, have you ever done paintings with a set number of strokes you're allowed to use? No, but I have done block-ins or drawing block-ins with a set number of lines that I can use, which is to say, like, get get the figure on the paper with either as few lines as possible, or you could even say 15 lines or whatever. Like, what does that look like when you set a constraint that's that extreme? I think it's kind of interesting. Maybe interesting as a diversion. I wouldn't, in my estimation, my personal estimation, I wouldn't say that it's the basis for anything larger, but it's an interesting like thought experiment to put yourself in that frame of mind, Let's see. Grace McConnell says, that was such a thorough answer. Thank you. You're welcome, Grace. I don't remember what the question was, but you're welcome. Let's see. Valerie Andrade says, solvent-free painting made it possible for me to use oil painting again. Yeah, and it's something that it's one of those things. It's not talked about enough. There's this kind of big group think, this hive mind that imagines oil with all this like caustic, horrible stuff constantly floating around in the air that is necessary to make a painting. And you just eventually discover it isn't. Now, hey, there's effects that are different. One of the things I miss about using solvents is the thin liquidity of paint that allows you to just spread a whole area in like one pass. That I kind of miss, and some of the effects that you can get from doing that. But I've substituted those with other effects, and life goes on, and eventually you adapt. Yeah. Let's see. MJ Artwork is asking, any other measurement tips to look out for when drawing portraits? All of them, man. All of it matters. Yeah, just don't get carried away with the features. It says like getting the length of the nose wrong, which affects the mouth and the lips. Other stuff like that that are like, because that's probably like a tip, right? Yeah, everybody knows I'm not like a tip-based teacher. I'm not going to make the 5 tips that'll make you a great portrait artist, and I'll say that very saltily. But in any event, there are some things that I guess you can boil down into like some kind of tip-based idea. But I don't have any off the top of my head. Centerline is king, Stick to the center line, and that'll get you a long way. Let's see. A lot of questions. Osiris says, hey, Stephen, have you ever visited the Russian Imperial Academy of Arts? I wish. I absolutely wish. Yeah, no, I've never traveled to the East for museums or for schools. A colleague of mine did a summer program there once. I think she had won some kind of scholarship and did a summer program at the Rep Academy, and brought back a lot of photos of their anatomy lecture room and their studios and things, which are, yeah, it looks amazing. That's the cool thing I think out there, or one of the many cool things, is that as far as I understand it, there is kind of an unbroken tradition of representational painting. By that I mean, in the West, what happened when, someone, by the way, has probably teased out this timeline, but essentially you go from this, this high academic era of the 19th century into this revolution against the academy, right? And that in turn, created this domino effect of revolting, and almost the value became the revolution, not so much what it was revolting against. That's why you have artists today still revolting against representational painting because it's, you know, it's so passé or whatever. It's like, didn't we kill that like whatever 100 years ago? You still need to redefine something away from the academy? Anyway, my point is, I don't think they went through exactly that kind of complete revolution in Russia. And please correct me if actually I would love to hear about this. There was a book called The Twilight of Painting. It's essentially about the rejection of representational painting from really like any kind of school or academy in the West, certainly in America, in Western Europe. It's why, hot take, it's why you have Tracy Emin as like the director of drawing at the Royal Academy in the UK. Like, that is like mind meltingly thick. In my humble, not so humble, a little bit humble opinion. So how did that happen? I don't think it happened exactly like that in Russia. I mean, that's why the Rep Academy still exists and still teaches representational like drawing and painting. That's why other schools over there still teach representational drawing and painting. There was never a generation of people that just forgot all like the lessons of representational art. It's one of the, anyway, I'd love more information about it. Anybody knows any reading resource about that, or about that, the story of like the progression of art education in the East? I'd love to hear about it. Let's see. Angelo Miguel says, the searching accuracy part, and this is related to the Harold Speed book, the searching accuracy part was in the chapter about drawing where he was discussing the differences between mechanical accuracy and artistic accuracy. Ah, yeah, this is very much, yeah. Oh, and this is a great, it's actually a fantastic part. And I remember a sentence from this. I wonder if you're going to quote it right here. But he says, the quote from Speed is, yet however much it may be advisable to let yourself go in artistic work, during your academic training, your aim, let your aim be a searching accuracy. Yeah, so there's a really cool thing that Speed describes in this section of the book where he's talking about how, I think it was like he took a trip to the continent, the museums of the continent, and he was like either still a student or just fresh out of school, and he had learned to make these kind of empirically accurate drawings. And when he analyzed like the arts of like the masters of history, he didn't see anything in there that reflected the kind of accuracy that he understood. Yet there was a strong sense of believability and accuracy and understandable, you know, structure and form and dynamism in that work, but not in the way that he had come to understand it as a student. And so he started to come up with this idea that there's really a different kind of accuracy, really that predominates for the artist rather than for the student. In terms of a searching accuracy, I think in this case, from that context, I would say that he's just describing that for a student, the guiding light is representation rather than, let's say, too willful a kind of interpretation. Like, naturally, anything that is a drawing or painting is an interpretation of what you're seeing. It can't be otherwise. As scientific as we would like to be, still, it has to go through our bodies, out of our hand, and onto the paper or the canvas or whatever it may be. But to let your ultimate aim be fidelity to the subject. Toby Michael, I think, is referring to something I said earlier, where I was making fun of something. Emily Fossum Art says, I'm an elementary school teacher, art teacher. Is there anything that you loved learning about art when you were young, or anything you wish you'd learned? Any suggestions for beneficial lessons I should do for my kids? Yes. First of all, I would say that you should try to hook up with the Da Vinci Initiative. This is something run by someone I came to know quite well in New Jersey. Started out with the people at the ARC, and then kind of branched away from there. The point is, though, they're actually doing and giving out free lessons about exactly what you're talking about. For myself, what I would say, like, I don't even know if it's possible. I mean, what level are kids at? I know nothing about. I don't have kids, so I don't really know like their cognitive capacity, and I'm sure that their focus in an elementary art school class is not pristine, but you know they're there. Whatever you can do to introduce the idea that drawing is something that you learn rather than something purely innate. Um, Anything that gives them a purposeful goal to say, let's draw this thing like this. I think would be really interesting, because a lot of what I remember as a kid, like in art school, was just it was just kind of draw anything. There's no real reference to anything you could see. It wasn't like we're all gonna draw a sphere or we're gonna draw a cube or something. Just basic lessons that allow them to feel a goal and to walk somewhere towards that goal. That would be the best that I could do, but you're an expert in kids. I am a total novice who knows nothing about where they're at, but I feel like as a young person, I might have appreciated that. That's the best I can do. But the Da Vinci Initiative, you should go to the website ASAP. Get there. Let's see. Toby Michael is asking, what are your thoughts about the Boston School and Paul Ingebrigtsen? I don't know Paul Ingebrigtsen, but I feel like I do know some of the Boston School in a very kind of peripheral way. This is the kind of Robert Henri spirit of painting kind of artists. I think it's really fresh. It's really direct. George Bellows. I think this is like the Boston kind of Ashcan vibe. If I remember correctly, you can correct me if I'm totally wrong about this. But it was broad, it was direct, it was passionate, it was representational without being flippant, in the way that I think representation after them turned into this thing that was where we only thought about the brushstrokes rather than the representation that the brushstrokes were serving. It was a kind of confusion that occurred for painters around that time that representation was being kicked out of academies. Let's see. Mborg 00 says, did you refer to Pierre Bonnard in a recent response? Not Bonnard, Bonnat, Bonnat. And it's Leon, Leon Bonnat, who is fantastic. Let's see. Steve Cordell says, what are your thoughts on chiaroscuro drawing? Well, it's actually something I kind of talked about when I was answering this question about the sculpture in the drawing program that Eirik Arnesen had asked. Really, by the way, it's cool, it's interesting, it's an approach. I think all approaches have merit and have value. In my experience, drawing with strong chiaroscuro, it embraces one of the things that drawing doesn't naturally do all that well or all that rapidly, which is to say broad passages of even dark tone. If you've ever tried to draw a big black background in charcoal, then you kind of understand that this is super labor intensive, but in terms of like what you get out of the educational experience of doing that is relatively little for the amount of work that you invest. So if you're talking about chiaroscuro in terms of like creating a strong picture of light and shadow in drawing, I find it to be, like I said, a big work investment for slightly less of a return. If I wanted to optimize that, I would just say, let's have chiaroscuro, but let's not have the big black background. But again, we get into like a dicey area about that, where you can kind of chop things a lot of different ways. It's an approach. It can be a great approach. It's not exactly my approach. Although my approach is not totally like miles away from that. It deals with light and shadow as well. Sam Reeves is saying, he's suggesting to JD Anarchy, who was asking about line work. To help improve my line work, I started studying comic book inking. Many of the techniques work for both pencil and ink. Not a bad shout there. Let's see. A lot of questions coming in. George Y says, hey, Steven, Do you have any advice for type of oil paint, for a type of oil paint? I heard linseed oil yellows, and some brands use alternatives that don't yellow as much, but I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Yeah, well, it's one of these things where oil paint companies, oil paint companies are, what's the word? They are here to make a profit, and they have ideals, and that's good. But in general, um, they don't all have like the same standards and practices. So if you see things like safflower oil being used, this is not actually like an ideal oil for oil painting, though it may yellow a little bit less, or according to sources that I've understood, it's a little bit less optimal. Again, with these technical things, it's almost like stats. You're just going to hear people quoting different versions of different things to tell different stories that are convenient for them. I find that usually the simpler the better, up to a point. I mean, look for companies that make oil paint that isn't totally inexpensive, and just try to stick to ones that actually use linseed oil. I know it yellows, I know it does, but all oil's yellow. If you get Chelsea Classical Studios linseed oil, it is probably one of the clearest linseed oils on the market. No, it is the clearest linseed oil on the market. So that can help mitigate whatever yellowing is caused by the linseed oil that's in your paint. Better yet, grind your own paint using Chelsea Classical Studios linseed oil, who I'm not paid by, but I know the company, and I know the guy that makes the stuff, and I know that he's making the best stuff on the market, so it kind of is what it is. But yeah, like in terms of like brands of oil paint, I tend to like, when I was in the States, I used a lot of Williamsburg. What was it? Williamsburg handmade oil paint. I think it's the name of the company, the name of the brand. And then, Old Holland is pretty good. After that, the stuff. I mean, that's just kind of generally what I tend to use. So that's what I know well enough to recommend. Varun Tulsian says, do you ever get a feeling that you would have had much more freedom with your art if you did it as a serious hobby instead of being a pro? Does thinking about clients' market hinder your creativity? Well, I mean, everything's a kind of hindrance in a way. It's very much like a zero-sum game, which is to say you can't take from one thing, or you can't add one thing without taking away from another. So if I didn't do my art as a pro, that would mean I would be making my living doing a different thing that would take a lot of my attention and energy away from my art making, which would mean that I probably wouldn't have been able to practice as much, which would mean that I probably wouldn't have gotten as good as much, or as good as much, as good as I had. And so my ability to like control my expression maybe would have been like a little bit less. Probably that naturally would confer like a little bit of freedom along with it, because I'd just be experimenting with stuff and just kind of seeing what happened. But I think the gratification that I derive from the professional pursuit of painting, it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit deeper than what I remember, because at a certain point I couldn't make money doing it. It was kind of a hobby in a way. I was very young. And for me personally, like I found it more frustrating actually to not be professional at it. So naturally different things would have happened if I'd have pursued things a different way, but it's also like an error in thinking that just because you're a hobbyist, you would like get to the same level and therefore the same kind of gratification, except be more free. You'd be sacrificing things in other places. Yeah, Eirik Arneson says, thank you for the answer. Always nice to get an outside perspective on things. No worries. Sam Reeves says, I am 50 and retired. Congrats, Sam. What stumbling blocks might I encounter trying to start an art career this late? That's a cool question. Take me a while to think about that. I mean, there's a million stumbling blocks you could hit. Probably, a million that you will hit, frankly. Let me just take a sip of this. So what is likely to happen is that you're going to start out wanting to do kind of everything, right? That you're going to want to start out and paint the big landscape and paint the portrait and paint this and that, and all these other things. A lot of painters, a lot of artists specialize. We don't specialize only because we have a vision that encapsulates only that one thing. It's just that the skill set related to that one thing is so deep that you need all your time to really get into it. Now, there are painters that paint a lot of different genres. I paint landscapes every now and then. I paint still lives, this and that. Just to say, it's going to take time to get good at each one of the things that you pursue. A landscape, though still a painting, is not really the same thing as a portrait. There's different fundamental practices in each one that you need to understand to do them well. There are in that Venn diagram, there are a lot of things in the middle, understanding values, understanding color values, understanding paint handling, materials, like a lot of things, there are going to be a lot of overlaps. There's some very distinctly different things as well. So I would say invest time in your subject matter of choice. Let your skill set and knowledge get deeper into something because that's really where I think the art career starts. It's easy to recognize when you're very shallow in an idea, when you're just on the surface of an idea, and you need to get kind of several layers down to where you're not thinking about the trees, you're thinking about the composition. That's where you want to be, I think. Let's see. Susan P. Faust says, Sam, if your stuff is good, it will sell. That is one part of the equation, but I assure you it's not the only part of the equation. Speaking from my own experience, and this will sound as if I'm a bit full of myself, but empirically, I understand my work was good for a long time before I figured out how to actually sell it, how to bring it to people in a way that made sense for them to buy it. I mean, I survived off scraps of selling, and I was making. There was a period where I made some of the best work in my life where I couldn't sell for anything. It barely ever happened. So I don't actually agree with that. I think it's not something that I've found to be true across the board. Selling I've talked about a lot. Is about communication. It's about your connection to your audience. It's about people understanding who you are and what you stand for, and sharing those values and appreciating things in a similar way. And that also requires you to kind of know what your values are. And I think that's really where, if you want to talk about how to sell your art, that's where it starts. Is you need to understand what your values are, what you stand for, what you represent in a way. So let's see. Ray the Amplified Root says, all oil paint and varnishes will eventually yellow. This is very much true. Avoid safflower oil paints in an attempt to avoid yellowing, as it is only a partially drying oil. Ray, this is the thing actually I was going to say about, I neglected to say about safflower oil. It is partially drying. It is not an oil that dries to a 100% hardened oil film. Why it's in oil paint, why it's in some oil paints, I have no idea. So let's see. Other questions coming in. Let's see. Sorry, wait. Yeah, no, I have to scroll to find a couple. Comedians, actors, and all says, hello. I've just started using acrylic paint instead of always using watercolor. Is there anything I should know? Yeah, it's a lot of stuff you should know. But acrylic paint is not really my area of expertise. However, like all paints require you to understand values, design, and at least a little bit about your materials. Brushes are not one size fits all, and it's not just about use whatever you feel. They have a direct effect on the kind of things that you can do with your oil paint, or rather with your acrylic paint. Let's see. George W. or George Y. was saying that I was thinking of trying walnut oil, but I'll keep it in mind. Here's the thing about walnut oil, because it sounds like a good idea, right? Like there's walnut oil and poppy oil. Walnut oil and poppy oil dry a little bit or oxidize a little bit slower than linseed oil. Linseed oil is the faster drying of them, which is kind of why it's desirable, even though it tends to yellow a little bit more. Also, walnut oil doesn't dry to as strong of a paint film as linseed oil does. So it's faster drying and it's a stronger paint film, which, in the end, are we really like shaving off, like amounts of like paint film strength in the long run? I mean, I don't know. I feel like some artists maybe get a little bit too consumed in what the perfect material is, because it's really so subjective depending on like the kind of effect that you want. Like I used to use poppy oil actually because I didn't want my paintings to dry fast. I wanted them to dry really, really slow, so I had a really long, long-lasting window of kind of wet paint where I could kind of manipulate it and get the effects I wanted. So for me, it was fantastic. Linseed oil wouldn't have been desirable. If I wanted to paint a different way, linseed oil would have been very desirable, and poppy oil not so. Yeah, Ray the Amplified Root is saying keep walnut oil near the top layers, linseed oil only for lower layers. I use both linseed oil and walnut. Avoid poppy and safflower. There are some great books, groups on painting best practices. Yes, this is absolutely, by the way, all true. I will only add my own two cents here, just to say that I've never actually varied oils in between layers. This is not a painting best practice for sure, but it's also something where, I look at like how in the weeds I'm gonna get from trying to modulate my materials so strictly between layers. That for me personally, it was a better fit to just figure out how to work in a simpler way rather than making it more complex with different materials. Now, like I know that that's not the case for every artist. Like I know some great portrait artists who, even have like, a process, of bottles of medium that are lean to fat, for different layers of the painting. If you are that regimented and interested, like that's totally cool. But I would say for the beginner, like that's not going to be the thing that's going to make an impact. Let's see. Goncalo Almiera says, even though I'm not happy with the result, I got a bark drawing. Should I share it on the Patreon community? What do you mean? Of course you should. You should share it there. You should also share it on the Discord server. For those of you that are already subscribed to my Patreon, you already have access to the Discord server. It is, however, a public server. So if you are on Discord, Stephen Bauman Artwork is the server. And you can go in there, post your artwork, talk with other people. Like the cool thing about Discord is that everybody that's there on my server in particular is in some way like, revolving around this concept of representation. So it's not, like arts in general. Like one person, makes I don't know, sculptures of worms out of styrofoam, and then another person's an oil painter. It's all people that are kind of, in the same field, more or less. Let's see. Goncalo Almiera says, and also when you don't feel like drawing, what is your secret, if you have one, to start drawing anyway? Productivity is a habit. Anything that I do, I try my best to ingrain it as a habit, and I try to remove as much as possible resistance. So if I had to go to the shop to buy paper to make a drawing, for me, that's a layer of resistance. I keep lots of paper around the house of all different types for all different types of projects that I might want to do at all times, so that I want to do this project, I don't have that layer of resistance of like, oh, now I have to go online shop, or I have to like drive to the art supply store and pick this out and buy it and then get home. By the time I do that, I'm exhausted. I don't really want to draw anyway, or I got to go pick up this person there. And I got to make dinner, whatever. Removing layers of resistance and creating for yourself a habit of practice is the best way to overcome that sense of not having the drive or the feeling that you don't feel like drawing. Most of that is just resistance. Emily Fossum Art says, thanks so much. I'll look up Da Vinci Initiative. Our lesson in 2 weeks is a sphere. Nice. Let's see. By the way, Emily, get a cube in there. Get a cube and get like a pyramid, maybe a cone. Give them some other forms to look at as well. Let's see. Thank you. Mborg says, thank you for all the clarification on Leon Bonnat. Makes sense. Sam Reeves says, I want to learn cross-hatching. Mine is messy and it's difficult for me to conceptualize value this way. Any advice? Well, cross-hatching might not be the cross-hatching that you know. I think when we hear about cross-hatching, we all think of like something like this, and I'm making another terrible drawing. We all think of like some effect that looks kind of like that, right? Like these big, broad passages of intersecting lines that form a grid. In reality, all the value that I make is cross-hatching, but it's just cross-hatching that is significantly tighter and much more evolved and organic than the typical picnic tablecloth version of cross-hatching. And I'm making a terrible ink cross-hatching here that I'm going to show all of you in just a second to indicate the difference. This is awful. That is the kind of cross-hatching that I'm talking more about, right? Cross-hatching is inevitable because of the nature of the material. We have a pen or a pencil, it comes to a point. So unlike a brush where we can lay down a whole giant brush stroke or swatch of a value, we need to build up and develop a value with a super fine point. That means cross-hatching is a necessity. We can't get around it. But the more you tighten up those cross-hatches, the more you can form them into like even planes of value, which is actually what you're going for. By the way, and this is like in all of my tutorials, I talk about this constantly. Let's see. There's other comments coming in. Comedians, actors, and all says, I go to school and the art teacher never lets us use photos or our imagination. Oh, like it's only drawing from life. Yeah, no, I mean, that's pretty standard. I mean, if you're going to a school that only draws from life, that's what they do. Let's see. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, Crawdaddy says, anybody use spike oil as a substitute for terps or solvent? I have used spike lavender oil as a substitute for terps or solvent. I found the smell to be overwhelming, and I really couldn't deal with it. I like it as an idea, but if you've ever used it in an enclosed space, like it is the strongest aroma that you'll ever come across. MJ Artwork is asking advice for drawing lips. I have trouble on the softness of the upper lip. That's such a question that you have to be drawing to answer it, or it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the advice for drawing lips is to understand the structures around the mouth. People get caught up drawing the lips themselves when probably most of what the lips are about are actually the forms around the lips. Let's see. Varun Tolsian says, thanks, Stephen, for the hobbyist versus pro answer. I really want to go pro, but it's scary. Yeah, I get that. But like you said, I think that the final artwork would make me happy even after the non-fun business side. Yeah, I like to think of the business side. When you start out, I think you're kind of trained to feel like the business side of art is in conflict with the art, like it's killing or ruining the art. And this is an idea that, by the way, is, in the great expanse of time is relatively new, that artists don't need to make a living or can make art for free. This is not this is a contemporary idea. And I try to think of it just as a keeping the lights on type of situation. I if I want to do this all the time, I have to find a way to fund the time that I want to spend. I'm an adult. I can't just be somewhere without any money. I have to pay rent and bills, and people have birthdays and Christmas and all those things that come up. Like, that's a part of life. And so art making is also a part of my life. I don't think that I need to separate those two. It's all just part of one continuum that is my kind of experience going through this world. So allowing them to be friends, and also to understand that, again, like, selling your work isn't a trick. You're not getting one over on somebody or using some tool to manipulate someone to buy what you buy, or buy what you make. They buy it because they see value in it, and you help them see that value by creating that value in it, by understanding yourself well, and understanding how to communicate what means something to you. And just as sure as we are all human, there are other people that are going to feel similarly about things, like, if I like birds, I paint birds. There are other people that like birds. They're going to see my paintings of birds and go, wow, I see in this the affection that person had for birds. I love it. I want to buy it. That's the bottom line about the whole thing works. So again, like, they just don't have to be in conflict. They can very much smoothly flow together, and the more that you allow them to be friends, the better. That being said, all the stuff I've had to learn about taxes, and I don't even want to get into, like, all that stuff is a huge bummer, and there's no solution to it. You just have to be bummed out by it and get it done, and get on the other side of it. Let's see. Hintze asks, hey, Stephen, do you use graphite or charcoal powder to shade large areas faster? Are there any cons to it? I have done that, and I think it's a great move. I mean, it's pretty efficient. I see these people using, like, pan pastels and stuff, and there's lots of different ways that you can get graphite or charcoal over a large area. I think that the real difficulty is getting a super dark large area, like a super dark and even large area. That's tough. Getting, like, a mid-tone area, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of do that. That can be, like, a part of your process that's useful. Maybe the only thing would be, like, by the way, charcoal and graphite in powder form in the air around you are not fantastic to breathe in. I'm sure that in my 15 years at the Academy, I had plenty of time to breathe in way too much charcoal. Let's see. Emily Fossum says, wow, Da Vinci Initiative is amazing. Scanning lessons now, and they are exactly what I've been attempting to create on my own. Perfect. And yes, my older students are doing the cube, pyramid, and cone as well. Emily, you are fighting the good fight. I'm glad to hear it. Let's see. Steve Caudell is saying, what are your thoughts on Virgil Elliott's book on traditional oil painting? He appears to be an expert on oil painting materials. Yeah, there's a lot of experts on oil painting materials, and all of them generally are pointing to similar things. So if someone's really invested their time in making a comprehensive book about oil painting and oil painting materials, I would say that probably there's a lot there that you can trust. Having not read his book, I can vouch for the fact that it is, but it probably is fine. I think, like I said, I think that there's plenty of really great texts out there about oil painting materials, many of which, maybe if they are a little bit older, might be the actual source that a lot of the new material is talking about, and so maybe in themselves a little bit more valuable. But hey, everybody's got an opinion. That's just what I think. Let's see. Valeria Andrade says, I have a very fond memory of an art lesson I had in 7th grade. We drew a can of Coke, and in the next class we crushed the can and drew it again. A lot more fun than a sphere or a cylinder. It's all a matter of perspective and opinion, Valeria. But yeah, no, I get it. The rudiments of drawing, excuse me, That's live broadcasting for you. The rudiments of drawing are not always like the most exciting thing. And I think that's why, they are so often like skipped over, frankly. Like the reason that we don't do the stuff that sometimes we ought to do is because it's like not the most fun, or not maybe the most like super engaging or whatever. Um, but starting with a basis of form as your building block to understand the whole world around you, I think is irreplaceable. Um, Partly because, like, one of the biggest aspects of our job that we need to satisfy as an artist is to take 2 dimensions and create the impression of 3. And I'm saying this in reflection to what I learned, which was a lot of flat shape design. I would have put form ahead of that, because it's the premise upon which, like all other representation, kind of depends. Volume, whether perspectively, in terms of like the depth of a space, or the roundness of a form, everything speaks about that. But I digress. Let's see. Tilina Kithalawa says, "Hi there. What's your favorite ground to paint on? If it's unprimed canvas, how many acrylic gesso layers would you apply?" My favorite ground, I mean, it's lately, right? But it's this oil painting paper, really absorbent, but not. It's interesting because it's not absorbent in the way that a gesso ground is absorbent, in that like the gesso ground will suck the oil right out of the paint as soon as like you put it on, like an unfinished gesso ground will do that. Whereas the oil painting paper, it takes the paint really, really well, but it doesn't suck the oil into a lower layer. So it has this very grabby surface that's like a gesso ground, but it doesn't have that super absorbency like a gesso ground. So that's my favorite lately. If you have unprimed linen, you want to do at least 2 or 3 coats of acrylic. Probably the first one you can thin down, then the second one's second or third, you can be a little bit more full on in the thickness with which you paint it. JD Anarchy says, oh yeah, all right, he's responding to somebody else. KS Little says, "I've noticed that if you get the right value and lay it in the right place, you almost don't need to know anatomy. And when you're done, a painting is revealed. What do you think about that method?" I painted without anatomy for a long time. My personal opinion is that that has a ceiling. And that's a ceiling that I wanted to get past. And anatomy was the way that I did that. Looking back on it, like in retrospect, I would say that anatomy is not a part of your artistic practice so that you can make anatomical diagrams. It's actually to clarify other parts of the process which are more difficult without it. Making a block-in is actually a little bit harder without the anatomical knowledge to do so. And it's not that you use all of it. Like in every block-in, I'm not drawing every bone in the body, but there are specific bony landmarks, down the front and back of the figure, that if you know them, know where they correspond and where they point to, it makes your job of blocking in like 100% easier than without it. So you can do it another way for sure, but you just have to understand like what the utility of it is. You don't have to know the veins in the forehead to understand the bony landmarks that help you make a good block in. That's what I would say. Let's see. Varun Tulsian says, "Do you think it's okay to not care about having recognizable art style? I like experimenting and never settle on one style effect, even if it worked really well. It all bleeds into every new work, though." Yeah, I'm someone who I've bounced around a lot. I've painted and drawn a lot of different ways. I probably still will. Well, I guess, I don't know. Lately, I think my work has come to a place where things are very similar, and I tend to experiment more with mediums, like colored pencil, for instance, what I've been doing lately. I think that it comes out of a place in a sense of utility, which is to say that yes, you can paint any different way that you want, but let's say you wanted to get good at painting heads. The heads are the important part. How you paint them is the means to the end. when your style or your application, your process becomes the means, it will tend to kind of funnel down into something that is less variable. That's what I'd say. A lot of questions still coming in. We have about 7 minutes and 16 seconds left in this live stream, which is epically long. But like, cheers to all you folks out there that are like still hanging out and watching. By the way, and I haven't done the YouTuber thing yet. Hey, people that are watching, if you hit the like button, it really helps me. So if you like and subscribe, if you think the content's any good, it would be a big favor to me. Just hit the like button. That'll help YouTube know that this video doesn't suck and that maybe other people would like to watch it too. So if you want to do that, that's great, and I'd appreciate it. Let's see. Juan Young says, what is your process like doing more complete works, conceptualizing or picking a subject? Yeah, it's different. I mean, it's just longer. For me, I'm someone who I really have to let an idea like marinate and drop down like several levels of complexity until I feel like I've really got something a hold of. So I take a long time before I start one of those works. Once I start them, then they can be finished quite rapidly. But the conceptualizing process takes a very long time. Also to kind of weed out the ones that are like the shiny new thing, it's very easy to get like enamored with something and think you should dive into like a big project about it, but maybe it doesn't have the meat on the bones that it needs to like get you through that whole project. And so this is, for me, a big part of it is like figuring out like what my level of investment, like how deeply am I feeling this project, or this conception, that this image that I want to make. So it's a long process, and it's largely kind of idiosyncratic. It's a lot about feeling. Let's see. Oh yeah, Thilana Kithalawa says, how did you find this kind of images or references? It's all models that I work with, or this guy actually ran the coffee shop across from my studio back in Jersey City. So I had a great look, so I said, hey, come over to the studio, I'll shoot some video of you, and that's where I have the source images from. So just people around you, just grab somebody, sit them down, either take some source images, get them to pose, whatever you can do, but you got to be relentless. Got to find models. Yeah, the question about Hello is asking what colors I'm using. It's actually all in the FAQs. There's a free post on my Patreon that's just like all the stuff I use, and it's all there explained in depth. A lot of times, like I'll also put links on where you can find it, and that's in the description of this video. There's an FAQs link. Let's see. All right, sorry. There's questions coming in. Thilana Kithalawa says, I'm from Sri Lanka. Have you ever heard of this country before? Even though we don't have any European master paintings to reference here, we do something about representative art. I've heard of Sri Lanka, of course. I've never been there, and I don't know necessarily like the artistic heritage of it, but for sure, outside of Western Europe, there's a whole lot of art. There's like a whole lot of representational work that has been done, just because I happened to study at a school where the focus was like Western European art, which is really why like a lot of my learning, a lot of things I know about really stems out of that, more so than any kind of like, I don't think Western European art is like the only one that we get to look at. Yeah. Let's see. Suzanne Barrett. We have 3 minutes left in the stream, people. Stay strong. Suzanne Barrett says, thanks so much for your thoughts and on being a pro as opposed to a serious hobbyist, removing resistance to productivity, and what you should aim to do if you are older and want to turn pro. Food for thought. I mean, every level has its challenges for sure. Valeria Andrade says, what canvas paper available in the market do you recommend? I ordered the Canson Figuras blindly. It could be good. I just haven't used it. What's available on the market right now, it will change in a month. If you are just patient, the Stonehenge one will be out, and I can highly recommend it. I've used other ones. that I haven't loved. I've used like the Arches oil paper. Some people like it. It's not the paper that I really like. In terms of like other ones that are out there, honestly, I can't recommend them, so it's not really useful for me to like say. But in about a month, in October sometime, the Stonehenge paper will be available, and then I can highly recommend that one. Or sorry, the Legion. It's not actually like I keep using Stonehenge and Legion a little bit interchangeably. Legion is the company that makes Stonehenge, and there are a bunch of other lines of paper that they make as well. They will also make this oil painting paper, which is not Stonehenge. It's just from Legion. Let's see. KS Little says, I totally agree, especially when you're trying to get that fold on a lip or something. But I'm also curious about, do you purposefully blend? Or are you more concerned with just grabbing the right color and value? Yeah, like in these Alla Prima studies, in general, it really is about the right color and value. I don't think really that any amount of blending in an Alla Prima setting is going to make up for the wrong color and value. So you naturally have to put that as a very high priority. Following that, then having like a good technique and an even application can be very helpful. But in these, it's so much about picking the right color value, putting it in roughly the right place, and then maybe like modulating a little bit of an edge in between the two. I'm not against blending. There's some things you have to blend a little bit, but like no amount of like taking the really dark shadow value and the really light value and smudging them together is going to make the right kind of transition in that area. Especially like the tighter the area that you get, like the turning of the upper lip, that's a really tough one to do if you have bad color values above and below that line. Whew, people, that's it. We have 22 seconds left. I just want to say thank you so much for watching. These live streams are going to be happening every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Oslo time. I'm making that commitment because I care about a YouTube audience and I want to build that up and I want to be here and like do cool stuff. So if you're interested in learning painting and drawing and stuff like this, you can go to my Patreon. It's super cheap. There's unbelievable amounts of content. Like I said, next month we're getting on to the Atelier tier again. It's going to be advanced cast drawing with ink toning on paper and white chalk. And also the Patrick Burns tutorial that I made with Patrick is only available for the rest of this month. So if you want to draw along with Patrick, you got to get on Patreon now and get there and get to work. There's also a group critique for that project, which is really interesting as well. Next month, it's gone. Anyway, whatever. Thank you, everybody. Take good care of yourselves, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m. Oslo time. Take care.